Good evening and welcome to the Danville 301 Housing Workshop. We are going to give everyone a minute to sign in and then we will begin. Okay, here we go. Thank you for joining us this evening for the Housing 101 or 301 workshop. My name is Diane Friedman. I am the Deputy Town Manager for the Town of Danville. This is the third workshop in a series of housing element workshops that have been presented as part of a 16-month public outreach process that began last March. This webinar is dedicated to how to use the housing simulation tool. To meet the goals and objectives of the Danville Housing Elements Updates Community Outreach and Engagement Plan, the project team that I will introduce in a minute has partnered with a diverse set of stakeholders within the community who represent multiple interests and experiences related to housing. The Community Engagement Plan has and will continue to focus on outreach to all residents, community-based nonprofits, service providers, organizations, and agencies who will be affected by the strategies and policies implemented in the Housing Element Update. As I mentioned, this has been a 16-month process, and a summary of our outreach efforts can be found in the Housing Element draft under Appendix F, which is posted on our website and our Danville Town Talks website. I'd like to introduce the outreach team this evening. We have our Chief of Planning, Dave Crompton, and Kat Bravo, who is the Management Analyst in the Town Manager's Office. Next slide, please. I'd like to provide an overview of the agenda tonight. First, we're going to give you a Reader's Digest on housing. Dave will cover that. Basically, the encapsulated view of the housing element process and a little bit about how we got here today. And then Kat will talk about the community outreach, where we are, and talk about next engagement activities, how they inform the decision-making process, what they are, and how to use them. And then we will leave plenty of time for questions and answers. And then I will come back and we will wrap things up. And I'm going to turn it over to Dave. Next slide, please.
Great, thank you, Diane, and good evening, everybody. So this is going to be a kind of a real condensed version of what a housing element is and why we are required to do this. So it really goes back to the state of California state law, which went into effect in 1969. That state law requires that every community in the state of California, that's every city and every county, prepare a housing element, which is part of our general plan. And the housing element basically plans for the housing needs of our community and our region in 8-year cycles. And we're currently in our, the housing element we're preparing is for the sixth housing element cycle. So what is in a housing element? Well, again, it's a plan for housing and includes goals for how we are going to achieve our housing needs. It has policies that help us kind of define the goals and our programs. And so basically it's a what are our housing needs and how are we going to get there? It includes a number of different appendices that you'll see in the Town Talks site that Diane referenced. One of them is the constraints analysis. That's kind of a major issue in a lot of communities. It kind of looks at the non-governmental constraints, which the big ones are the cost of land and the cost of construction. And then governmental constraints, such as the amount of time it might take to process an application or the city or regional fees that might be imposed on a project. And then the most important and the biggest lift here for our community and most is the identification of sites. Next slide, please. So there's a process that the state goes through. Every 8 years, they do population projections and associated housing projections. And they provide a total housing number to the different regional governments. In our case, that's ABAG, the Association of Bay Area Governments. They were given from the state over 441,000 housing units at different affordability levels to accommodate over the next 8-year cycle. And then ABAG assigns portions of that large number to the individual cities and counties in the 9 Bay Area county region. So what's that mean for Danville? After a long process, the town was tasked with accommodating 2,241 units. And again, that's at different affordability levels. So that's at very low income, moderate income, and above moderate income housing units, which generally equate to different density levels. And I think it's important to note here that the town and local governments do not generally build housing. So it's not our responsibility to build the housing. It is our responsibility to have enough land in Danville that is zoned and general planned appropriately to allow for housing in the numbers and at the affordability levels that we have been required to provide for. Next slide, please. This is just kind of a summary showing Contra Costa County. This is the 19 cities and the unincorporated parts of Contra Costa County. So you can see the town of Danville is 2,241, and it's broken down into the very low, moderate, and above moderate categories. In order to accommodate low and very low for our area in the Bay Area, the state requires us to provide housing at least 30 units per acre, and then that qualifies, at least for housing element purposes, that qualifies for low or very low income. And just for comparison, our sister city, San Ramon, has a total of 5,111. Let's see, the largest, I think, is Concord has over 5,000 units that was assigned, and then the unincorporated part of the county, which is all the county areas that are outside city limits, actually has the largest number at 7,645. So that's what we're tasked for as part of this housing element. And I'm going to turn it over to Kat to talk about our engagement efforts and the current tool that we are launching to help solicit additional public input into the sites that we want to choose for housing.
Thank you. So as part of the town's ongoing community outreach plan, an engagement tool called the Housing Site Suggestion Map was launched in March. The purpose was to ask community members which sites they believed would have opportunity to accommodate more housing. Over the course of a month, 281 pins had been dropped on 99 unique parcels. Each site was evaluated against the state's site criteria, including its parcel size, the existing land use, the likelihood of that site to be redeveloped in the next 8 years, and then access to transportation. Viable sites from this analysis, along with sites identified by staff, were incorporated into the housing plan simulation tool that was launched on July 1st. This tool is designed to seek input from about which sites are most appropriate for future housing development, which will be and the tool will be available until August 1st. Successfully submitted housing plans will help inform the Planning Commission and ultimately the Town Council in the decision-making process. The housing plan simulation tool can be accessed through the Housing Element Project page on the Danville Town Talks website. This is an interactive tool for community members to build and share their idea of a balanced housing plan that meets the town's target RHNA number. In this simulation tool, the total units, or the target goal, is made up of the 2,241 housing units the town was assigned through the RHNA process, plus a buffer. A buffer of additional housing units is essential to ensure the town can continuously meet its housing goals in each income category through the 8-year cycle. In the event that an identified site is either not developed for housing or the housing development is not at the needed income category. The buffer can be adjusted to what the user deems is most appropriate. And once the buffer has been identified, the balancing begins. There are 26 different sites identified within 5 key areas for housing units to be assigned. A successful housing plan can shape in various ways. As you increase and decrease density on a site, you will see progress towards a successful plan shift. While there are 26 sites to consider, you may find that you don't want any housing on a particular site, and that's okay. Unless a site is already zoned for residential, the option to decrease the density to 0 exists. But keep in mind, those units will need to be made up somewhere else. Once you have identified enough housing units and are in the green, you can successfully submit your housing plan. And I will turn that back over to Diane.
Okay, thank you, Kat. If you would like to subscribe to our news feed at danvilledowntalks.org/housing element, you will continue to receive updates. You will also be able to use this tool. It is very important that we have as many community members as possible continue to provide input on this process. The site will also allow you, if you're new or nearly new to this process, or you have been on this journey for 16 months with us, to learn about the housing and the governing legislation, to provide informed input. It has a schedule to this whole process and where we've been and where we are. If you want to look at the Housing 101 and 102 sessions to catch up, they are available on the site. We will also have additional scheduled workshops that are live on Wednesday, July 13th at 10 a.m. and Wednesday, July 20th at 6 p.m. We are inviting anybody who is connected to an association or a club to please contact us through the website, and we will be glad to do presentations for your group. This takes us to the next slide. Anybody that has any questions out there, we would be very happy to answer them at this time. Here's the first question, and you can use the Q&A or the chat if you would like to type in your questions. First question from an attendee is, if a property I own shows up as a housing site on this map, does it mean I can't use it for its current purpose? Dave?
Dave, you're on mute.
I think that's a question that I can answer here. So a couple parts to that. Number one, this is a preliminary map that is a number of sites, probably more sites that we're going to ultimately need, but most of them are good sites. And so as we go through this process, there will end up, after the state reviews our housing element, we'll go through a public hearing process in the winter, likely in December and January, where the final sites will be selected. If you do have a site that is selected to be changed from whatever it is today to a residential housing designation, it doesn't affect what you're currently doing on your property. As I said earlier, the town's responsibility is to provide enough lands that are zoned appropriately for housing to meet the numbers we've been assigned, but we don't have any control over whether or not anything is going to be built. So a site can be designated for housing, but it may never get built. It has to be a site that has the possibility of being redeveloped in the next 8 years. That just means that economically it would be viable to redevelop. It doesn't have a use on it today that is so valuable that nobody would tear down and want to redevelop. So hopefully that answers that question.
Okay, next question. I submitted a request to present/ask questions about the housing element. What is the timeline for those meetings? I would hope to be able to meet before the draft is submitted.
So number one, we are available to talk to any resident or any property owner out there at any time. Our information is on the website. I'd be glad if you sent me an email or gave me a call. I'd be happy to meet and talk about all of these issues. We have this comment period for the next 30 days. And then after we submit the housing element to the state for their 90-day review, then there will be a public hearing process that will start at the Planning Commission level and then to the Town Council. And those will be noticed public hearings, and we will invite any and all comments, concerns raised, so that those bodies can take into consideration those comments as they deliberate.
Okay, thank you. The next question, what happens if Danville decides it doesn't want any of these sites to be developed?
So this goes back to some of our previous webinars that talks about the consequences of non-compliance with the state required housing element. And they are severe. And so not having a compliant housing element is really not an option. They include fines of up to $600,000 a month. They include the possibility of a moratorium on our building division where we would not be allowed to issue building permits, period, for additions, remodels, etc. And probably maybe worse is that the courts, the state of California, could take over our planning function and do our planning for us. And instead of us deciding the best place for the homes in our community, the state could decide that for us. And so it's it's a tough, it's a large number of housing units to accommodate, but it's something that I think that we're working hard to try to find a way to accommodate.
Okay, I do not see any other questions. Kat or Dave, do you see any other questions? Okay, if you like to participate, please use the chat or the Q&A feature.
There was a new question came in.
Okay.
It says, is this a vote? Are we voting on where the housing units are going? So this is a suggestion. It's a tool that we're using to kind of help gauge community sentiment about where the housing units should go. And this information, along with the information that we're going to receive with our environmental impact report that we're preparing to look at the impacts of developing different sites, as well as other input, will all be kind of weighed into the Planning Commission and Town Council's decisions later on. So this is not a vote, it's just helping us to kind of key in on the sites that seem to be the sites that the community is pointing towards.
Okay, next question. I have lots of questions, but we'll wait until a one-on-one meeting to ask. Do you have any details on your plans to turn the police department and town offices into multifamily housing? HCD suggests that you are supposed to describe your plans to convert city-owned land to housing and how you plan to comply with the Surplus Lands Act.
So yeah, we're very familiar with the Surplus Lands Act, and we know that's a process that we will need to go through. When we move next door, our current plan is that we would include the current town offices site as one of our arena sites and redesignate it to multifamily housing. And going through the surplus lands process, ultimately make it available for multifamily housing and hopefully partner with a nonprofit builder to actually get the majority of the units to be actual affordable units.
All right, thanks, Dave. A few more. Has the state or whoever assigned these units to Danville considered all the impacts of more housing on water use?
Well, part of that's a really good question, and one that we hear a lot and that we understand. Again, as part of the project, we're preparing an environmental impact report, and that requires that there be a section on public services and provision of water and sewer, fire, police, and other services. So one of the sections in the IR will be water service. We do know that East Bay Mud, since we are in the urban service boundary for East Bay Mud, so far they have indicated that they would serve new housing in Danville. But some of that's going to come down to the project level review later on. So we'll see. That's something that's being studied.
Okay, another question that just came in is the owner of the recent Town and Country site required to provide housing?
Nobody is required to provide housing. That is, the Town and Country site is one that is on the map that you see in the tool that was just presented. So it's a candidate site. So, we'll see if that is a site that, people seem to point towards as a site that would make sense for an affordable housing site. Again, even if it is designated for multifamily housing, there's no requirement that a property owner actually develop it as multifamily housing.
Okay, we have a little bit of feedback here. I do not see any other questions. Kat, Dave? Okay, I think there's one more. I see that some of these sites on the map already have units pre-assigned to them. Can we eliminate units from sites we feel are not appropriate for development?
I can answer that question, and the answer is yes. So all of the sites on the tool start out with a density of 25 units an acre. However, if the site is not already designated for residential, then it can be decreased. So there are two sites on there. One is 2900 Camino Tasahara, that I believe is at 25. It's zoned already for 25 units an acre, so that's 200 housing units. It can't go below that in the tool. And then there is the parcels that are Danville Court Apartments, because those are existing housing. We can't decrease, or the 46 units that are there currently are made up in the adjustments. But certainly if there's a site that is not ideal for an individual that's completing the tool for housing, you can decrease it to 0.
All right, I do not see any other questions. Kat, next slide, please. So to wrap this up, we want to thank you for your time this evening, and we encourage you to please spread the word to your neighbors and other community members. This outreach effort is really, we're really trying to get as much feedback as we possibly can on this process that helps inform the decision making of these sites. We want to thank you for your time. Please help us spread the word. Please go to danvilledowntowntalks.org if you want to review the history, contact us, provide feedback, sign up for our e-news. And with that, thank you again. Have a great evening.
Thank you.